We all know the transition's happening. There's no doubt about that. What we are working to do on a day in and day out basis is ensure that the transition is thoughtful, it's well planned, because what we're looking to keep in balance is safe, affordable, reliable, equitable, and clean. Systemically, as a whole, we need all 5 of those things to be true when we look at our energy system.
Hello, and welcome to Solar for All, a podcast focused on the intersection of class, race, justice, inequality, and the solar industry. I'm your host, Jeff Greenfield, and the show notes and other great information is available at solarforall.show. That's SHOW. And today is our guest, Julia Hamm. Julia is the president and CEO of SEPA, recently, or maybe not too recently, renamed itself the Smart Electric Power Alliance. She's been doing this for 17 and a half years in that role. She went to school at Cornell University and business management and marketing. Many of us appreciate her in many ways for what she does in the industry. But probably one of the funnest pieces is hosting and co-founding SPI and Energy Storage International. And it's a large multi-organizational effort to bring us all together to talk about policy, technology, and the state of the industry. Well, let's just dive right in. Diversity and inclusion means different things to different people, and thankfully, it's a growing topic that a lot of folks are talking about. I know that you and others in the industry have been talking about this for years, for decades. I think possibly one of the earlier memories I have of really appreciating you was when Booth Babes was a thing at our big trade show, and how some colleagues and friends were upset about that and wrote, I think it might have been in Home Power or Solar Power World, about how this is a disgrace and it's not where we should be going. And I think you all came out in support of that and said, let's lead on this.
Yeah, gosh, I feel like we've come a long way, but like anything else, still, more progress to be made. But yes, there were a couple of years there when the things that were happening, not only at Solar Power International, but at other trade shows, not only in our industry also, but even in other industries, that just crossed a line into very disrespectful. And, that should not be tolerated in a business environment. And it's hard as the organizers of SPI, for us together with SIA as the other co-owner of the show, it's a challenging line to walk to be able to tell your customers, basically, you can't do this. But it was the right thing to do, and really find the right rules and guidance in order to make sure that the show was professional and respectful and inclusive, and that everyone felt comfortable at what was, one of the most important things that we did every year as an organization. So that was, that was a really tough situation to handle for SEPA and SIA together. But I am very proud of how we handled it. We did draw the line in the sand and say this isn't going to be tolerated. And we've seen significant improvement since then.
Yeah, hear. I think everyone has appreciated that the show has gotten better. And a lot of the women I know in the industry, felt listened to and felt appropriately respected. Although, there's lots and lots of room to grow, and a long road ahead. What other kind of changes have you noticed? I mean, 17 and a half years, I guess if you've got was it a core that you were working with or doing some work with before? I think it's about 20 years in the industry in general, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, a bit of history. So 20 years ago, I started working for a small company that at the time managed SEPA. but also was hired to help found ACOR, the American Council on Renewable Energy. So I was assigned to that contract in addition to the role I was playing with SEPA back then. So yeah, helped to found ACOR. And then in 2004, I became the CEO of SEPA exclusively. And so, yeah, so it's been 20 years. I've seen a lot of change. And, I reflect back, one of the real things that sticks in my mind when I think about the diversity of the energy industry is I think it was probably 2005 or 2006. I put together a CEO dinner that it was really in the height of the nastiest of nasty net metering debates between the solar industry and the utility industry. And so I put together this CEO dinner in conjunction with one of the big annual utility meetings every year to bring together utility CEOs with solar company CEOs in a more relaxed environment for them to get to know each other as people, so that hopefully we could begin to build trust to have conversations about how to work through some of this. And so I was the host of the dinner. SEPA was the host, but I personally was the host of the dinner, and I invited all of these people. We had a phenomenal turnout. I remember we were in this very nice meeting room in the basement of some hotel somewhere, and there were probably 40 to 45 CEOs in the room, about half utilities and half solar companies. And everybody was having cocktails. We had a cocktail hour before, and then I asked everybody to be seated for dinner. And it wasn't until everybody sat down at the tables that I stood up to welcome everyone that it dawned on me that I was the only female in the room. And so it was just this moment of and it really caught me off guard. It literally, as I was standing up to welcome everybody, it caught me off guard. And so I just sort of chuckled and I said, I'm sorry, I can't help but not acknowledge the fact that I'm the only female in this room. And that was actually how I started the entire evening. But then
Wow.
said, okay, we've all got some work to do, obviously, but that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. And we moved on with the evening. But so that really sticks in my head. And again, that was, I think, 2005 or 2006. Today, if I were to organize that same dinner, the profile of the people in the room would look very different, right? There would be I don't know what percentage, but far more women in the room, definitely people of color. So I think the energy industry as a whole has made a lot of progress on that front.
Well, that's a great story, and talk about very specific kind of a before shot, and then as an after shot or today current state shot, we could take a look at the SEPA board of directors. I as prep for the show, I wanted to find out if you're walking your talk, and I have to say that I was impressed. I counted a lot of women, I think 8 out of 19, and a lot of, from what I could tell as an outsider, folks that appeared to be, non-white, non-traditional, 7 out of 19. It sounds like that might have been intentional. Why don't you talk a little bit about, I guess, when you started focusing on this, what the reaction was like, and then what some of at the end of the day, the cynics are going to say, oh, people are checking boxes and they're responding to outside pressures and jumping through hoops. But I think that many of us would also say, no, when you have a diverse group of people with diverse backgrounds, you get a diverse, bunch of brains and experiences, and it yields better results. So maybe speak a little bit about how the board change is reflecting or is translating to better decisions and better service to the industry.
Yeah, so I think, at least in my 20 years having worked with SEPA, we've always had a more diverse board than you would sort of see generally in other places. So I don't know that, and it was even in the early days by design or intentional. I think it was just I don't know, to some degree, it's sort of part of my nature to want to see a variety of faces around a table that don't all look alike. But so I think again, so I think for a long time, without even having an intentional focus on it, we were doing it. But the intentional focus has come into play in the past few years. And for us, I can't remember exactly what date this first started, but we've had a board diversity target in place officially for, I'm going to say, at least 5, 6, 7 years, where originally that target was to have 40% of board members, and our board is typically it's 20 seats, although not all 20 seats are always full, but it's 20 up to 20 seats on the board. And our target initially was to have 40% of those seats filled by sort of underrepresented groups, however you want to define, sort of just not white males, basically. But last year, we decided to make that target even more aggressive. And so now we have two components to our board diversity target. The first is gender parity. So our first goal is to have 10 of the 20 seats filled by women. You read out the numbers at the beginning. We aren't quite there yet, but we're making, we're getting pretty close. And then the second piece is still to have 40% of those 20 seats filled by people from other underrepresented groups, be that people of color, people who self-represent as LGBTQ. There's a variety of ways that we would say that we're meeting that objective. But in combination, half women plus 40% of the seats filled by underrepresented groups is a pretty aggressive target. But we really want to lead on this front. We want to show that it can be done. And it's not easy. Our board are primarily CEO or other C-suite level executives. And so we have to be very intentional about thinking about who can we cultivate, right? Who might not today be ready to be on the SEPA board, but might be in a couple of years, that we can actually help lift them in their career. How can we help elevate them and help them progress through their career to the point at which they would make the perfect board candidate for SEPA in one of these diversity groups? So it is thinking much more intentionally about things. And the same thing goes for our staff. I mean, we have always had, without being intentional about it, we've had a very diverse staff. Definitely in terms of gender diversity, we're doing okay, I would say, on racial diversity, but we definitely have more progress that needs to be made on racial diversity than we do on gender diversity, and in particular at senior levels. We've got a pretty good percentage of people of color on our team, but for the most part, those are not people who are on the senior leadership team. So that is a place where definitely want to focus as opportunities emerge to help bring more diversity to our senior leadership team at the staff level.
Talk about intentional and being a kind of a long-term project and a long-term thinker. I've gone through this a little bit as my role on the NABCEP board, and again, seeking to broaden our perspective and better reflect the industry that we're serving than the population that we're serving. Well, we might as well have some folks from the diverse population that we serve. But it's hard. It's hard to find someone that's also a board fit and wants to contribute and not be disruptive or a negative factor, but collaborate. Being on a board, an active, real board, is a big commitment. And there's a culture, there's a dynamic that you want to preserve and cultivate as well. Just like your staff as well. How many folks are employed at?
We have about 45 or 46 full-time positions currently.
Wow, that's a big organization, bigger than I thought. And same thing, you want people that are able to do the work and get along with each other and get through the tough times. And then also bring fresh ideas and other perspectives than a whole bunch of straight white men might have, or any kind of a monocrop.
Yeah, and it really, again, I keep going back to the word intentional. It's about the intentionality of it, and it does take more time, and you have to be committed to it. It doesn't happen by itself. If I go back just to the board example, I can list off the top of my head 10 white male CEOs who want to be on SEPA's board that would be a great fit, but I've straight out told them as a white male, I just can't justify putting you on my board right now. I've got to look for other people who bring diversity to the board. Once we meet our diversity targets, then it's diverse. This is an important distinction for me, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. If you have a table of all women, that is not a diverse group. If you have a table of all Black people, that is not a diverse group. If you have a table of all white males, that is not a diverse group, right? So diversity includes white males. And I don't want people to forget that, right? Having a diverse group includes white males. It does not mean you're excluding white males. But if you're starting with a table that's largely or exclusively white males, you have to push the pause button for those people to bring in diverse perspectives before you go back to saying, okay, I can bring more white male voices to the table again. And it's awkward. It's not always an easy conversation. It's uncomfortable, but I think that's part of this journey that as an American society we've been on, in particular over the past 12 months, is we have to be okay having uncomfortable conversations.
Absolutely. There's a pretty popular show, Uncomfortable Conversations with a
Yeah.
Black Man, that is just one of the many resources that are springing up for folks that are on their journey. And, at the end of the day, it's gone from being not racist to being anti-racist.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of folks are learning. There's a lot of white men, white women that are really revisiting kind of institutional racism and a lot of their perspectives, even on perspectives on the economy and on capitalism and a meritocracy.
Mm-hmm.
After a deep dive, probably brought on by the murder of George Floyd more than anything else, and then the protests over the summer, shining a pretty bright light on this smoldering issue in a big part of our country for 200 years. It's hard, but I think it's exciting. I'm in sustainability, driven solar and focused on climate change, but now I'm pretty amped up about social change and cultural change.
Yeah, one thing I was going to mention was, for a long time, going back to the trade show, Solar Power International, which is obviously a different type of diversity. It's not just Solar Power International anymore. We have North America Smart Energy Week, which has multiple brands under it, of which Solar Power International is still the largest and the flagship. But for years, SEPA and SEIA have had a focus on elevating diverse voices on the program at SPI, right? Making sure that we don't have any panels that are all men. Increasingly making sure that we have people of color represented on the panels. And again, it takes more work, but it's worth it. And one of the things that SEPA actually has been working on over the past few months is we've just created a database for diverse speakers in the clean energy industry. We haven't launched it yet. We hope to launch soon. But it's going to be a public resource where anybody who fits any sort of diversity criteria, be it gender, racial, disability, veteran, can self-identify and submit themselves to say, here's how I qualify as a diverse speaker. Here are my areas of expertise.
Kudos to whoever came up with that. I think that is just one of many tools that folks are developing. Great job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's one of those things where We didn't fundraise for it. SEPA's, we're using our own operating expenses for the cost to develop it because we just think it's the right thing to do, and it's a gap that's really needs to be filled, and so we were happy to step up and fill that gap.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at things as gaps that need to be filled. So, do you have any ideas for what we could do as a next big project or some other needs in the industry?
One of the things that I personally have spent a lot of time thinking about, what sort of education or training can we provide to people, be it people of color, women, others, to help accelerate their rise through their career. And I think about that with two different hats on. So I'll talk about first my SEPA hat, but then also I'm the chair of the board of another organization that I'd love to chat about for a bit. But through the SEPA lens, because we work so closely with the utility industry in particular, one of the things that I've witnessed over the past 20 years is that women and people of color historically within utilities, so utilities generally, actually, when you look at their entire employee base, are quite diverse relative to other industries. But that changes when you look at the senior and executive levels. So one of the things that SEPA has been spending a lot of time thinking about is how can we help, in particular, people of color rise up faster into executive level positions at utilities. And so one of the projects that it's still in development, we haven't gotten it off the ground yet. We're still fundraising for it, but we are hoping to put together essentially a fellowship program for diverse people within utilities who have already been identified sort of to be on a leadership track, but to train them specifically on clean energy issues, combining two things. One, recognizing that utilities need a more diverse leadership, but also utilities increasingly now have carbon reduction commitments and targets and clean energy targets. And so if you have these diverse employees who are better trained than their peers on clean energy issues, they're going to be even more compelling candidates to get promoted into senior executive positions, because they're going to be best positioned to be able to help the utility meet their carbon reduction targets. So we're hoping to get that fellowship off the ground next year in 2022. We'll see how it goes. But taking off my SEPA hat and on a related thing, I'm the board chair of an organization called the Clean Energy Leadership Institute, or CELI. And CELI has been around for a number of years now, but it's still a relatively young nonprofit. That the flagship program is a fellowship program. And increasingly, diversity has always been very important to CELI. So in terms of it's a very competitive application process to become a CELI fellow. And we have always monitored and had metrics around the diversity of each fellowship class. But increasingly, equity and all of it, the justice, equity, inclusion, diversity is all not just being looked at in terms of the fellows themselves, but in terms of the programming, the education that they're receiving, making sure that all of it is interwoven into, okay, so maybe it used to be that there was a CELI class that the fellows took on electric vehicle programs, for example. I'm just making that up, but now really making sure that there's a huge emphasis on not just electric vehicle programs, but equitable electric vehicle programs. So that at the very beginning of every thought process is, how do we make sure what we're doing is creating equality? And that's a big change I'm seeing in the industry across the board, is putting equity at the beginning of everything. And we're seeing it, especially with the new administration at the Department of Energy. There's at the administration level, the federal government now has this Justice 40 initiative, where they're looking to make sure that the money that the federal government is spending is benefiting communities and people that have historically been disadvantaged. And just the conversations we're having across the board at different programs and offices within DOE, every conversation starts with, what are you doing as it relates to equity and diversity and inclusion? And it's just a total shift from how things have been done in the past, and it's just fantastic to see, because I'll go back again to the word intentionality, right? It is, everyone is being intentional about these issues, and that's what it's going to take to actually make a difference. It's, if people expect it to happen on its own, it's going to, maybe it'll happen eventually, but it's going to take way too long. We need everyone intentionally focusing on these issues in order to make meaningful progress in a time frame that is acceptable.
Yeah, it's that's a great example of the double whammy of, or the double plus of clean energy and social change, and how the Biden administration really did zero in on this during the campaign, and I was a little cynical. You hear a lot of, especially during campaign, you hear a lot of talk of highfalutin ideas and aspirational concepts, and I think they really nailed it, how clean energy, which was for a while a wedge issue, or
Mhm.
being used as a wedge issue sometimes, to say, oh, solar is an elite, white upper, rich person's toy. And the studies, show that that's not true. But nonetheless, it was used as a wedge issue. And so they came right back out and said, no, clean energy and this transition can be a huge opportunity to right some historic wrongs and build back better, as they say. And now here we are in this administration with some of the appointments at DOE and some of the a new cabinet. Was it a cabinet chair for racial just, or for environmental
Mhm.
justice? That's just phenomenal. I thought the Obama administration was progressive and forward leaning, but boy, this Biden team is starting out strong.
Yeah, and really leading by example, because just as you're saying, when you look at the people who have been put in place in the new administration, it is the most diverse group of government employees, appointees that I have ever witnessed in my 20 plus years in this industry.
Yeah, exciting times. Well, I guess the devil's in the details, and the real impact of this. It's too early to say. Hopefully, we'll be seeing it over the next decade. And uh, remind me, do you all have a mission statement? I know it has something to do with decarbonizing the grid, or moving towards a well-connected utility grid and infrastructure. But let's get back high level, back to the start off of me introducing you without telling our listeners what SCPA is really all about. But
Yeah, no,
maybe let's wind back to that, and tie the mission in with how it might overlap with what we're talking about with this podcast.
definitely. So, the Smart Electric Power Alliance, so our vision statement is a carbon free energy system. And our mission is to help facilitate and accelerate the smart transition to a clean and modern energy system. So, the key words there really around smart transition, right? Because we all know the transition's happening. There's no doubt about that. What we are working to do on a day in and day out basis is ensure that the transition is thoughtful, it's well planned, and that it is understanding the trade-offs, making sure that decision makers are well educated to understand the trade-offs with every decision. Because what we're looking to keep in balance is safe, affordable, reliable, equitable, and clean. We need all five of those things to be true. We can't be making decisions that are sacrificing any one of those five things. Now, ultimately, any individual decision is going to be better, better for one or maybe not all five of those pieces at once, but systemically, as sort of as a whole, we need all five of those things to be true when we look at our energy system. And with how quickly things change, that it just requires a whole lot of education of a lot of different stakeholders to keep pace with that change and to be able to, again, to make good decisions that ensure that it really is a smart transition.
Yeah, well, that's part of the overlap is it's education and making change and making sure that people aren't stuck with old ideas. Just like in, I don't know if we could have predicted where we'd be today, but maybe 10 years ago, we probably would not have guessed that solar would be less expensive than, mainstream baseload power.
Yeah. Well,
But in certain
I
cases,
think
it
we all
is.
predicted we would get there, right? Just nobody knew exactly what the time frame was going to be.
Well, Julia, it's been exciting to find out what you're working on for the next chapter. You've got some good chapters behind you in terms of using your position and your network and your knowledge to nudge change forwards. And it's an exciting time for the industry. Thank you for your work and thank you for joining us here on this pod. One of the cool things we're doing here is we're not just talking about energy policy and clean energy and economics. We're also talking about fun stuff, and this is the Solar for All Better Together section. So the first part is the note and promote section, where you can share with our listeners, any books, authors, thought leaders that you want to amplify, and any kind of advice that you might want to pass along that can help our listeners.
So, one of my favorite business authors is Patrick Lencioni, and he has a whole series of books that I've read many of them many times. One of my favorites is Death by Meeting, and it is his writing style is just so interesting because most of his books are written as sort of fables. So it's written like a story, but there's just so many sort of business lessons that you draw out of the story. And Death by Meeting is just a great one. I often have new SEPA employees who are in roles where they're responsible for organizing or scheduling or leading a lot of meetings read that book, because it's something that certainly for me, I'm a very organized person. But even for me, sort of understanding the sort of best practices of meetings didn't necessarily come naturally, right? Actually, my first executive coach I ever had, after sitting in on a couple of meetings that I was running, said, "You're just not disciplined enough with your meetings. Like you need to do this and this and this and this." And he said, read this book. And it was just so valuable to me. And that's just one of the many books by Patrick Lencioni that I just think they're so practical, from a leadership standpoint that I just really like them. So that's my recommendation on an author with one specific example of a book that I recommend. Gosh, in terms of advice, I'll sound like a broken record, but I said it, how many times have I said it in the podcast so far? But be intentional, right? Be intentional in everything you do. And obviously, we've been talking about that in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice today. But I think that it applies to everything in life. And I think that a lot of my success I attribute to being very intentional about decisions, about the things that I'm doing, and helping SEPA as an organization be intentional. So that's my piece of advice.
I like it. I knew that intentional was going to come back in, and I'm a big fan of Patrick's work. So sounds like you're being more intentional with your meetings. I think
Yes.
that's what his advice would be: is don't do meetings because you were introduced to meetings and that's how you learned. Let's be more intentional about how team dynamics work. Well, the second part of the Solar for All Better Together section is the 1+1 playlist. We are better together, and we're building a diverse playlist, just like we're trying to build a diverse industry. So I'm inviting our guests to select a old favorite and then something new. What do you have for us, Julia?
Well, so the first thing I'll say is what all my good friends, my husband, my children, my family will tell you about me is I'm horrible with favorites. If you said what are your top favorite songs of all time, or what are your top favorite 5 movies of all time, I can't do it. My mind goes blank. I'm not going to say this is my favorite, but like I'll give you some things that I would put on the playlist. So one of my, the song, when a song comes on, I'm like, oh my God, I love that song. So one of those that I would point out is Southern Cross by Crosby, Stills and Nash. That's just an old favorite that I always enjoy listening to. Makes me happy when I hear it. And then a new one, I don't even know who sings it, so I can't tell you who the artist is. And I probably am going to totally butcher the pronunciation because it's in French, and I don't really speak French. But I think it's Les Eaux de Mar. And I don't even know how I think I came across it because I was listening to a Spotify channel that maybe it's like the Nora Jones channel or something. And this song came on. I said, "Oh my gosh, I really like this!" So I clicked it, and it's now in my songs I like playlist. And I don't know, I wouldn't normally choose to listen to music that I can't understand the lyrics, but this one I really enjoy.
All right. I think that's The Water of the Sea, if my French is all right. So we'll look it up. We'll put it on our playlist. They're available on Apple Music and Spotify and Pandora and wherever you get your stream. You should look for the Better Together 1+1 playlist. Well, this brings us to the sad end of our session together, but it's been really helpful for our listeners to get an inside peek at what your approach to inclusion, diversity, and social justice and change is professionally at your organization, as well as what you see in the industry and some of the places where we can strive to build a better world. If you like this stuff, subscribe to our podcast and follow us. And if you like the movement and what we're trying to build, spread the word. Put it out on your socials, put it on LinkedIn, invite someone to listen in, and find us in the show notes at www.solarforall.show. And we're really glad to have had you here as a guest, Julia. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me, and thank you for taking the initiative to start the podcast. It's great to have more voices speaking out on the topic.
We're hopeful that we're going to be part of the change that's happening everywhere. And we need everybody if we're going to be building a carbon-free energy infrastructure. We can't do it with half the potential resources not involved. We need everybody.